everybody, and welcome to the Katie Weaver Show. This is Katie. I'm your host. I'm so happy to be here. If you are with me, I want to welcome you to the chat as well. So, I am live streaming through Facebook and YouTube, and so either way, you can participate in the chat simply by commenting on this video. And my software gives me a peek at all of you, so I should be able to see your comments regardless. I am over in the 12 Radio chat room as well, and you can find that by heading over to 12radio.com, clicking on the chat button, and you'll be redirected into the Facebook chat. So, anyway you're commenting or chatting with me, I should be able to see you. So, that is what's up. How's it going? I kind of breezed in at the last minute. I had an email from my doctor I was looking at and got a little sidetracked, and here we are. I think I used to be a better multitasker than I am now. I don't know. Anyway, all is well, and I'm just glad to be here. Yeah, how is it going? Well, we have water, so that's good. Um, Last week on the show, I think I told you guys that our we were having a problem with our we're on a well and our pump had no electricity, wasn't running water. And somehow in the process of something going wrong, most of our components got fried. So we replaced the pressure switch, we replaced the breaker, we replaced the pump on the well, everything. And we still did not have water. We went about 72 hours without water. And which we had lots of water in jugs and it was fine. It's just inconvenient and frustrating, but I know we still have it easier than many, so I don't want to downplay or get too dramatic. But finally, an electrician friend came over and helped Scott take a look, and as it turned out, it was the main power line that runs from the well that's in the front yard to the pump, or well, the well's in the front yard and the electricity's in the backyard. That's the easier way to say it. So there's a wire, of course, that snakes under the ground from one to the other, and that is what went bad. So he did help with a temporary fix until we could fix it entirely, which Scott did yesterday. So we've had water for days now, and now we have water in earnest. Because with the temporary fix, we couldn't really run our sprinklers, and we don't run our sprinklers a lot anyway. But we do have to water pigs and chickens and tomatoes, So anyway, all is well. It is all fixed. A challenge for sure, but thank God for good family. We had plenty of help figuring it out and working it out, so that's where it's at. But yes, and now we have every new component available. Plus, it looks like our well was dug really good and deep. Our well's like 50 years old, but it's deep, so we should have water in that well for a very long time because we got annexed into the city about 15, 16 years ago. So now, if our well goes bad, like if we had to have a building permit to dig a new well, we can't. We would have to hook up to city water. And who the hell wants to do that? I do not. For one thing, it would be so expensive. The frontage fees are so expensive. But also, then you get to pay them every month for water, which now we don't. We pay an electricity bill, but you still would anyway. So, anyway, that's all. That's what it's about. I am just glad to be here, you guys. Our topic today, I love it. I love it a lot. So, last week Scott was showing me some videos online of people in Japan making traditional Japanese incense. And it made me think about making incense. I've made incense before, powdered incense, which I think is a very cool process, and I detail it for you in today's episode of Luminous or edition of Luminous. But these are a couple of incenses that I have made in the past. This is one for abundance. They both are abundance. And I I purchased powders and some resins and used a mortar and pestle and ground them together and made my own, which is something you can absolutely do. And this is the way you burn them, of course, is on the charcoal briquettes, which you may have done in the past. But anyway, the Chinese or the Japanese ones are really interesting. It's a big process the way they make incense. That's your charcoal discs. So I was thinking about incense and making it in the past and how I'd like to do what we were seeing in those videos and make my own, but make it more like into cones or sticks. And you can do that with products. It's powdered tree bark. The most common one is called joss powder. And there's another one too that's used, matcha, not maca, maca. Yeah, I think it's maca powder. Really expensive. So I ordered Joss. But we were talking about how interesting it would be to go on a little excursion and gather local plants and whatnot and bring it home and dry it and grind it and mix it with Joss and create our own locally sourced incense. So that's what we're going to do for fun. But with all of that being said, it really made me start thinking about incense and how I feel about incense. So I have kind of a incense started as a scary thing for me. Bear with me. I know that sounds insane. You know, I was raised in the Mormon church. And what I'm going to say, I want to be clear, these are things I was taught from my grandpa. And if sometimes when I talk about what I learned in the Mormon church, I have other LDS people, well, I'm not Mormon anymore, but LDS people that will confront me and say that what I'm saying is not correct or not true. I can only tell you what I learned at my church, at my ward, and from my family. So if it's not what you learned, I can't help you. So don't at me with any of that. Also, if you're Catholic, please don't let me offend you. These are just things I was taught as a kid. I don't believe this stuff anymore, but these are what things I was taught. So we were taught that the Catholic Church was the biblical great and terrible whore of the earth, and the old time Mormons in my family hated the Catholic Church. I think feared the Catholic Church. And one of the things that the Catholic Church did, incense. And so I was taught as a kid that incense was bad, that it was, if people were burning incense, it's because they were up to no good or because it was associated with the Catholic Church. And so that was what was in me, right? From teachings from when I was a child. So as an adult, I had left the Mormon church, but I had a really interesting response to incense. It was disquieting to me. Smelling incense was unsettling. I felt like I was doing something wrong or something bad was afoot because that's how I was raised, right? It's just, we're just products of our upbringing until we start challenging those things. So we had gone into a metaphysical store in Idaho Falls, a town over from me, and they were burning incense, and the smell of that incense just hit me in the face and messed me up. Scared me, honestly. So uncomfortable with incense. And then the more I floated around in New Age circles, the more I grew to love incense and understand incense in a way that I didn't in the past, and start, of course, unthreading all of the old beliefs about incense that were not even things I believed or believed anymore. But smells and the way they trigger all kinds of emotions, So then, of course, with Healing Hands, when we opened Healing Hands, we burned incense all the time. If we weren't burning incense, we were diffusing an essential oil, but we burned incense a lot. We had our big fountain, a big goddess fountain that we had commissioned, and Scott had built us a big box around it that we'd filled with sand so that it was like a giant Zen garden, so people could sit with it. We always had crystals all over in it. Sometimes we'd arrange them in like mandalas and stuff. Sometimes they'd just be there. Sometimes it was really problematic when people brought their kids in and didn't keep an eye on them because we just had a big old sandbox on the floor. But by and large, It was there, and we had meditation cushions seated all the way around it so that customers were welcome to come in and sit on a cushion and sit with the fountain. There were candles and incense in the sandbox so that you could light those and just have a moment, right? So incense was always burning in the Zen box, but in the store we always had incense too. Every time I'd walk in the door, one of the first things I did was burn incense. Burn incense at home. I still burn incense at home. But my entire relationship with incense changed. And now when I smell incense, it's because it takes me back to my days of healing hands and what I loved about it, what I miss about it, and just, all my memories there. Smells, man. They get deep in your brain. So obviously, incense has a huge, huge part of spirituality throughout history. It's not something we've talked about very much. Maybe more in passing than specifically about this topic, but I find this to be really, really fascinating. So, I called this week's edition The Language of Smoke, the History and Spiritual Tradition of Incense. One thing I learned pretty early is what I didn't like. I love Chandan. Chandan incense, it's a ceremonial Buddhist or Hindu Buddhist temple incense, and it's really a sandalwood incense, but Chandan's what it's called. That is my favorite incense in the world. However, copal, just in the resin form, I love copal. I've always loved frankincense, and I love rose incense. Incenses I don't like, patchouli or lavender. Most specifically, lavender. I hate lavender incense. No offense to lavender. I actually love lavender in every other aspect except for patchouli or except for incense. Ugh, blah. But just like essential oils, there are so many different kinds of incense. You certainly can fulfill whatever need you have with it with something you do like, right? But those are just mine. So I'm curious to know what your faves are, or if you even burn incense or like it. Palo Santo as well is a favorite. Mm. But copal. Now I want to dig my copal out. It's a resin, so you typically throw it on the charcoal disc. Mm. Okay. But do carry on. All right. Let's get into it. So before incense was cool, it was sacred, right? Now you see incense at bookstores, spiritual shops, metaphysical stores, even just gift shops. You see incense all over the place. I've even seen incense in weird places like the grocery store before. Like, you can find incense. Definitely find incense. You can find stuff that smells great, stuff that smells terrible. Some of the most interesting incense I've ever smelled came from Japan because they don't use a stick. So most people, at least when they're making stick incense, there is a very thin wooden stick in it, right? You know this. But Japanese incense does not use a stick. And so it burns cleaner and more pure because you're not burning wood along with burning the contents of the incense. My experience with Japanese incense is it is quite a lot more money because you don't get the stick, right? It burns longer, it burns cleaner with a kind of a whiter smoke, and it has a different scent. But anyway, if you want to become an incense connoisseur, consider that. Oh, Suzanne said Nag Champa and Palo Santo. Yeah. I like Nag Champa too. I love Nag Champa as long as it's a certain brand. There are certain Nag Champas that I think are very I don't even know what the right word is, sharp, and I don't like it. But Nag Champa done right, yeah, I could burn it all day. Okay. You can even buy, this has always slayed me. You could even buy incense that smells like weed. Why? Most people burn incense to cover up weed, not to burn incense that smells like it. That's always cracked me up. Anyway, carry on. Incense, or the use of sacred smoke, is something that our earliest ancestors took part in. Surely our ancestors knew that uh, different branches, different kinds of trees, different wood created different kinds of smoke. Were that the resin-rich tree, the pine gum, the tar, that created a different smoke that smelled differently, that behaved differently. But our ancestors looked for meaning in the natural world much more than we do. And you can only imagine how smoke was probably responded to. Some of the earliest evidence of incense comes from Egypt and ancient Mesopotamia, more than 5,000 years ago. We know that priests burned precious resins inside temples throughout the day. We know that they believed the fragrant smoke purified sacred spaces and pleased the gods. Incense was a part of daily rituals, accompanying prayers, ceremonies, healing practices, and offerings that were presented before divine images. Interestingly, much of that is still done today in certain places. This was an interesting thing because a lot of what was burned in Egypt was frankincense, and frankincense was extremely expensive and prized, and they burned it in sacrifice. It was rare and precious, and they turned it into smoke so that it belonged entirely to the divine. And we'll talk a lot more about frankincense and myrrh and the trade around it, but we'll get there. Ancient Babylonians, Assyrians, Egyptians, Hebrews, Greeks, and Romans all had elaborate incense rituals. They used different plants that they believed to have different qualities, but it was kind of the same theme, right? Fragrant smoke cleansed sacred spaces, invited blessings, honored the gods, and symbolically carried human prayers toward heaven. Lots of different cultures with a very similar belief. Now we know that when someone lights incense in a cathedral or a Buddhist temple or a meditation room, or even just a quiet room in your home before journaling, that rising smoke makes you pause. When do you light an incense stick that you don't sit with the smoke for just a minute? Whether you're conscious or not of it, you do because of the properties of it, because it's magical, because it's interesting. So let's talk about frankincense. The resin worth its weight in gold. Frankincense comes from the boswellia tree. There's several species of boswellia trees, and they grow in the dry, rocky landscape of Oman, Yemen, Somalia, and parts of northeastern Africa. They grow on the cliff's edge. They grow in places that you wouldn't think anything could grow. That's where you find boswellia. They live in the absolute harshest conditions. So to harvest the resin, they make a shallow cut in the bark, and then over the following days, the trees will release this milky sap that hardens into golden droplets that have been known as tears. And once they dry, then they gather the tears by hand And that's how it's done. That's pretty much how it's been done for thousands of years. It was expensive because it's rare, because it's difficult to get to, because it only grows in very specific places, and because harvesting it is no joke. So, centuries ago, frankincense became one of the most valuable trade commodities in the ancient world. Literal kingdoms grew wealthy, sorry, by transporting it across deserts by camel caravan. Historians have compared the importance of frankincense in the ancient economy to the importance of oil today. I mean, consider that. Frankincense was that important. It was that highly valued and highly traded. So the Egyptians couldn't get enough frankincense. They imported it for temple ceremonies, funerary rites, perfumes, cosmetics, medicine, and then Jewish worship picked up frankincense and started using an enormous amount of it as well. In the Temple of Jerusalem, it was used in incense blends that were burned as sacred offerings. The Greeks and Romans also loved frankincense and burned it in their temples and during religious festivals and public ceremonies and things of that nature. So frankincense became a vital and super, super important trade. Now, as you probably know, frankincense and myrrh were included in the Christmas story of the birth of Christ as one of the gifts that was presented to the baby Jesus. They, at the time, frankincense would have been considered more valuable than gold. Myrrh may have as well. Frankincense symbolized divinity, worship, and reverence. It reflected the belief that this child was worthy of sacred honor. It was the biggest gift, the most expensive gift, and the most meaningful gift that could have been given. So, throughout centuries, frankincense has just continued to be found in churches and monasteries and all different kinds of religious practice. Catholic and Orthodox churches sometimes include clouds of fragrant frankincense, right, from the swinging censers. That's a tradition that stretches back for thousands of years. And I think probably lots of other churches as well. Spiritually, we have, in the New Age world, associated, and this is because of ancient belief, frankincense with purification, clarity, prayer, protection, and connection to the divine. Many people burn it before meditation, before healing work, or whenever they want to create a peaceful atmosphere. Frankincense also, ground frankincense or ground boswellia, is a component of boswellia is considered to be a powerful anti-inflammatory. I have taken it before in pill form, interestingly, like in ground up capsule form. All right, let's talk about myrrh. So, if frankincense is bright and uplifting, myrrh carries something different. I don't love the smell of myrrh. A blend of frankincense and myrrh I can live with, but myrrh alone is not my jam. It's too, I really want to say bitter, and that's probably not quite fair, but that's kind of it for me. Maybe it's too dark, too musky. Hell, I don't know. I don't have the right words for it, but I've not been a big myrrh fan. Myrrh comes from a hardy desert tree, a lot like frankincense. This is a species of the Commiphora tree that grows across northeastern Africa and the Arabian Peninsula. The resin is harvested a lot like frankincense, cutting the bark and allowing the tears to run out and harden. While frankincense has a light citrusy aroma, myrrh is darker, earthier, and bitter. That's how it seems to me. Uh, a lot of people love it though. It is seen as a grounding scent. It's a lot of times really encouraged to use myrrh for grounding, myrrh essential oil or myrrh incense. Myrrh also was treasured as a sacred incense and powerful medicine. So ancient Egyptian physicians used it for wounds and infections. Embalmers relied on it for its preservative qualities for the mummification process. Across the ancient world, it found its way into healing balms, perfumes, anointing oils, and temple rituals. Myrrh also appears in the biblical story of the Magi, as you know, but myrrh has is more of a symbol of mortality, sacrifice, and healing. Myrrh also appears during Jesus' crucifixion and burial, again strengthening its association with grief, compassion, and the sacred work of honoring life's endings. How about Kifi? Kifi is an Egyptian sacred evening incense. I don't think I've ever smelled this. It made me want to order some, and I probably will because I'm dying to smell this now. Maybe you have. If you have, please tell me. I want to know what you thought. But it sounds like it could have a varying recipe. So Kifi wasn't a single resin or herb. This was a very complex blend of botanicals, spices, wines, fruits, and resins that was prepared with extraordinary care. It would take days to make. So there were all kinds of like ritual and ceremony around it, like grinding certain ingredients at certain times throughout the day and for a certain amount of time and with certain prayers being said until it was finally put together into this fragrant paste that then was shaped and dried into the product itself. It was sacred work. This was carried out by Egyptian priests. This was super, super special and precious. So, ancient recipes varied somewhat, but you're looking at something like frankincense, myrrh, mastic, juniper berries, cinnamon, cassia, sweet rush, raisins, honey, wine, cardamom, and aromatic woods. Right? We have to try this, right? We have to try this. Some recipes called for more than a dozen different ingredients. Really interesting. So Kifi was traditionally burned in the evening as the sun disappeared below the horizon. So ancient writers have described it as calming the mind, easing anxiety, and encouraging peaceful sleep and preparing people for dreams. The ancient physician Galen wrote about Kifi for its medicinal uses, and other ancient texts suggested it was prescribed to support digestion and respiratory health. Really interesting. Right, Tara? We have to try that. Got to find a really good seller. Yes, I'm so interested. But anything can be made by the cheapest seller in town. So I think if I buy Kiffy, I'm going to look for someone who either hand makes it, maybe. Ooh, I wonder if there's anyone on Etsy that hand makes it. I really want someone who knows what they're doing. I don't want just, dollar store incense for this. I want the good stuff. All right, let's talk about the incense roads. So, as we know, incense, particularly myrrh and frankincense, really helps to shape the economies of entire civilizations. Thousands of years ago, we know that frankincense and myrrh were some of the most valuable commodities in the world, more valuable than gold during certain eras. And we know that they could only be harvested in certain areas, which made them very rare and special. So the demand for them stretched across Egypt, Greece, Rome, Persia, India, and eventually China. So moving goods of this sort required huge networks of merchants, camel caravans, ships, and trading cities. And those travel routes eventually became to be known as the incense roads. So the incense roads had long lines of camels that crossed the deserts. Imagine these deserts. I mean, we think it's hot. Oh. Carrying sacks filled with fragrant resins worth astonishing amounts of money. Travelers navigated dangerous terrain, sandstorms, bandits, and political conflict to get their cargo where it needed to go. It was fraught with danger, but this was something that was just constantly in motion. Cities like Petra flourished as trading centers where merchants from different cultures would exchange goods, but also, and this is how civilizations and broader civilizations are developed over centuries, uh, they exchanged ideas, languages, religious beliefs, and stories. Also, food and recipes and ideas about life and the world. And this is how a lot of this was old social media. So, in many ways, incense became one of the world's earliest global industries. Is that not so fascinating? Right? Hot and sweaty, but they smelled good. I agree. So then the incense roads connected to the Silk Road. What was the Silk Road? Well, it was similar for moving silk out of China. Well, out of Asia, I should say that. But this created an enormous web of commerce stretching from the Mediterranean to East Asia. This is where silk, spices, precious stones, ivory, and exotic animals and incense traveled from culture to culture, carrying traditions, ideas, people who might have traveled from one country or area to another and stayed. This is how we really started mixing it up. So a resin harvested in Oman might eventually perfume a Roman perfume, or a Jewish sanctuary, or a Buddhist monastery thousands of miles away. Pretty interesting. The many spiritual languages of smoke. This is one of those fascinating things. We've talked about a lot of fascinating things this year uh, about how often different ideas in different cultures were the same means to the same end. And smoke is no different. We're talking about countless different cultures and countless years where people discovered that fragrant smoke seemed to transform ordinary spaces into sacred ones. They didn't believe the same things, they didn't worship the same gods, but the conclusions were basically the same. Smoke helped to create an atmosphere where people felt closer to the divine, perhaps to each other, perhaps to their own spirit. In Judaism, incense blends were offered within the temple as part of sacred worship. In Christianity, particularly Catholic and Orthodox traditions, incense continues to symbolize prayer rising toward heaven, while also honoring sacred moments during worship. Throughout much of Asia, incense became woven into daily spiritual practice. Buddhist temples are full of the fragrance of sandalwood. This is where worshippers offer incense before statues of Buddha. Hindu traditions uh, use incense during a lot of ceremonies like the puja, devotional worship, where fragrance becomes one with love and respect. In Japan, Incense became so refined that developing it turned into an art form. We're going to talk more about that. In China, Taoist temples often have used long coils of incense. Have you seen the coiled incense? That's pretty cool. That burns slowly for hours, representing continuity, devotion, and the steady rhythm of spiritual practice. Indigenous cultures, we know, using fragrant smoke, using what was locally available. There was a lot less trade in indigenous cultures. It was much more about using what was local to you or within the hoop or circle that you traveled. But things like uh, sage and Palo Santo and juniper and things like that became a part of their spirituality. Let's talk about the way of fragrance. This is Japan's kodo. So this is what's so fascinating to me. So kodo is translated as the way of the fragrance, but that kind of only scratches the surface of making Japanese incense. It's not just about enjoying pleasant scents. It's a classical art, along with the Japanese tea ceremony known as seido and the flower arranging known as kado. These are all practices in mindfulness, beauty, simplicity, and presence. It's all a part of the process. So practitioners in Kodo don't talk so much about smelling incense. It's not about creating something that smells pleasing. They talk about listening to the incense, listening to all of the different ingredients to create your blend. Traditional Kodo ceremonies use aromatic woods rather than stick incense. And a lot of times they actually warm them over a flame, not burn them, just to release the scent without the pungent sense of the smoke. So participants might pass the incense from person to person, taking turns listening to its fragrance while appreciating the scent. Isn't that fascinating? Some gatherings even include games where participants attempt to identify different aromatic woods entirely by fragrance. It's an exercise in awareness, being quiet, being present, listening, smelling, using all of your senses to be able to figure out what it is you're experiencing. How about incense and folk magic and everyday life? So, incense itself has been just as important to ordinary people as it has, the churches, the royal ceremonies, all the all the highfalutin stuff. Across Europe, Asia, Africa, and the Americas, families were known to burn fragrant plants inside their homes for reasons that probably had very little to do with religious ritual, though it could have. Much of it was for freshening the air or encouraging health. It could be for certain plants offered during protection, blessings, or comfort during difficult times. It makes me think about Kinnick Kinnick. Kinnick Kinnick is a smoking blend, and there's a lot of different blends of Kinnick Kinnick, but Kinnick Kinnick is a smoking blend that Native Americans were known to use, still do in some cultures. And it was a blend of different herbs and plants and things that were gathered locally. I've smoked kinnick before. It's interesting. Some kinnick has tobacco in it, some does not. But again, it was much more for the smoke, right? Kinnick is supposed to be healing for your lungs and also a connection to your creator. But again, it's about the smoke. Oh, We know that in North America, sage was burned for purification. Pine resin filled cabins with clean resinous fragrances during winter months. Imagine just, being in your cabin and thinking it stinks in here and just going and peeling a little pine resin off a tree and taking it in and tossing it in the fire and calling it a day. I like it. Copal was probably used a lot the same way in South America. Rosemary was associated with remembrance, healing, and protection. Lavender was tucked into linens and added to fires or included in incense blends to encourage calm and peaceful sleep. As you know, I don't like lavender. Yes, but only in incense form. Lavender can stay in every other way, including in my coffee. I drink lavender cream coffee frequently. So there's no right incense. There's no most spiritual incense. This is has everything to do with what works for you. So you do have to try a few things probably. And one of the challenges with incense, I think, is that it smells differently on the stick or in the cone than it does once it's lit. Have you ever smelled just common sage that's lit versus just, not the same thing at all? Same thing with incense in general. So you really have to be able to burn incense and stay with it to decide if it's something that you want and like or that you don't. If you find yourself only tolerating an incense smell because other people said it was what you needed or wanted or was great, don't. There's too many cool things out there to just tolerate anything. It should be something that you like, that actually makes you feel good. Let's talk about some science behind it. So, for thousands of years, we know that people have used incense to calm the mind and to prepare the spirit, to create sacred spaces, deepen meditation, and promote healing. So, modern science is saying that that's real. I mean, it's real in the spiritual sense and in the emotional sense, but what about in the physical sense? Your sense of smell is like no other part of you. The sense of smell, the olfactory system has a remarkably direct connection to the limbic system, which is the part of the brain involved with memory, emotion, learning, and behavior. It's one of the reasons scent has an almost magical ability to transport us backward in time, or, make us feel totally freaked out by the smell of incense because we were taught that it was bad, right? Any of those things. Lillian has gotten she has sandalwood, rose. Oh, sandalwood and rose incenses from India. Oh, yeah, wonderful. She had to turn her rose stick on, burn it right now. I hear you. I hear you. I was going to start some incense before the show, but I ran out of time. So instead, I've just got my little powdered bag here that I've been smelling. How about Melaleuca? You know what Melaleuca does to me. Makes me sick as a dog. The scent of Melaleuca, that's not an incense, but oh God, can you imagine Melaleuca incense? Oh, you wouldn't even have to open the windows. You'd just have to burn your house down. You'd have no other option. Oh God. Okay. Thanks, Kev. Back to the limbic system. Now, when I smell incense, it takes me right back to healing hands, right? I'm right back to the fountain and the crystals and the classes and the ceremonies and the meditation and the clients. That's what incense does for me, especially Chandan. We've all had this experience, right? In one way or another. Other smells. Maybe bread reminds you of your grandmother's kitchen. Maybe fresh cut hay reminds you of your childhood summers. A particular perfume might take you back to somebody that you loved, right? If I smell White Shoulders perfume, that's my grandma. If Here's a weird one, but my dad was a barber and we spent a lot of time at the barber shop, especially by the time we were in junior high, he paid us to clean the barber shop. And so we would be in there once a week Christy and I, and Kara, cleaning, and the smell of barbicide. You might not even know what that is, but it's the liquid stuff that they soak their combs and tools and stuff in and clean their scissors and things with. Barbicide is still widely used. It's required usually by law by the health department to, keep from spreading cooties from one patient or one client to another, right? Barbicide has a really distinct smell, and any time I have gone into a salon, I get a whiff of that barbicide and I am straight back in my dad's barber shop. It's just those kinds of smells. How about wooden pencils? Do you go straight back to grade school? Or crayons? Probably. But fragrances create emotional landmarks in our lives. And that may be why incense has remained part of a spiritual practice for so many thousands of years. It may just be the magic of it that science won't ever really be able to pin a finger on, right? So, how do you bring incense into your own practice? Well, you just do, honestly. Sometimes it's just simple as using things for specific things to create specific intentions. For example, I like to burn Chandon when I write. I might decide to use something else for doing a reading or a quiet cup of tea while I watch the birds out the window. You may have certain kinds of incense that you want to set apart for certain things. There's incense for lovers. There is incense for studying. There's incense for calm and peace. There's incense for recovery. There's the possibilities are literally endless. So choose things that work for you and use them when it makes sense for you. Yeah. Now, if you've not experimented with loose incense before, don't be freaked out by it. This is simple. You can make whatever you want. Just make sure that whatever plants you're using you know are not poisonous. Don't make incense out of poisonous plants. I feel like I shouldn't have to say that, but I'm saying it anyway. And it's easy enough to go to Google and say, hey, Google, are marigolds poisonous or whatever, right? Like you need to double check, and that's on you. That's your responsibility. I'll give you one. Nutmeg should be used very, very sparingly because nutmeg smoke can get you high and then make your head hurt so bad you'd like to just die. Ask me how I know. But be careful with nutmeg. But again, if you're going to make loose incense, there's never been a better time because A, you can find lots of recipes, and I'm giving you some today, but you could come up with many more online. But you can also do a quick search on anything you want to use and make sure it's safe for you to burn and inhale. That's all. So be smart, be safe, don't do wild things, but don't be intimidated. You could also just do a single resin, like frankincense or myrrh or copal or sandalwood for that matter. Well, dried flowers, woods, spices, resins. Again, you can make your own blends. You need a brick or a not a brick and mortar, that's a building. Uh, you need agar wood, yeah. You need a mortar and pestle. And you can get a mortar and pestle if you don't have one. They're not that expensive. But in my experience, a marble one is really good for this because you can get wood ones too, but I just think the marble ones do better. You can also just use a coffee grinder if you'd rather. However, you'll probably be stuck using it for incense forever and not go back to using it for coffee. It kind of muffs stuff up. All that resin is very sticky, and so it kind of I don't I don't know. Maybe you could clean a coffee grinder after doing that. I'm not sure that you could. But coffee grinders themselves are what, 15, $20. So not insane to just buy one that's specifically for that. However, and maybe this is a bit of a purist attitude, but I kind of like the idea of using the mortar and pestle because it seems a little bit more authentic, more of a return to your ancestors than throwing it in a coffee grinder. But maybe your hands can't do it. Maybe mine can't. Hell, I don't know. I haven't done it in a while. Maybe it's a coffee grinder for me too. Either way, you can do it. So I'm going to give you a few ideas of blends. So a blend called Quiet Mind would be 2 parts frankincense, 1 part sandalwood, 1 part cedar chips, 1/2 part dried chamomile flowers, and a pinch of crushed cinnamon bark. And then again, you would just grind that all together, and then you just throw a pinch of it at a time, if you're going to keep it loose, a pinch of it on one of your charcoal discs. Now remember, with the charcoal discs, these suckers get hot as hell once you've got them lit. If you touch it, you're going to get a 3rd-degree burn. Again, ask me how I know. I have hurt myself with incense and essential oils more times than I will ever admit, just by doing stupid things. But one of your little discs like this, you light it. I usually try to light it in 2 or 3 spots around the corners, and then you just give it a few minutes. You just have to wait until it like starts burning together and it'll start turning white. And in the places that have turned white, you can put a little pinch of incense on it. Eventually, the whole thing will be white. But I promise you, start very small, because the smoke that comes off of these when you start throwing your incense on it is a lot, especially if you're doing this indoors. So, but that's how you use it. This has to be sitting on something that is heat safe, obviously. And whatever you sit it on, when you go to pick that up and move it, recognize it may also be very hot. So protect yourself and don't get burned, like me. But don't let me scare you. Just be smart. That's all. This isn't that hard. All right, let's talk about a few more blends. A quiet mind blend for meditation, journaling, or even bedtime would be 2 parts resin, 1 part sandalwood, chips or powder. The yellow sandalwood powder is my favorite. A tiny bit goes a really long way and it smells amazing. 1 part cedar chips, a 1/2 part dried chamomile flowers, and a pinch of crushed cinnamon bark. We already talked about this. Good Lord. Okay, we're moving on. Good God. Okay, forest walk. Love this. This is stuff that I could do locally. It's kind of a lot of what I'll probably do for myself. 2 parts pine resin, 1 part cedar, 1 part juniper berries, lightly crushed, a 1/2 part rosemary, and a small pinch of spruce needles, if available. Morning light. This is a good uplifting blend for beginning the day. 2 parts frankincense, 1 part sweet orange peel, a 1/2 part cinnamon, a 1/2 part cloves, and a 1/2 part sandalwood. Heart's Garden. This is soft, floral, comforting stuff. 2 parts rose petals, 1 part frankincense, 1 part benzoin resin, and a 1/2 part hibiscus flowers. And you can add lavender unless you hate its guts, and then don't. Sacred Earth. This is a rich, earthy centering blend. 2 parts myrrh, 1 part frankincense, 1 part cedar, a 1/2 part mugwort, and a 1/2 part dried sage or garden sage. All right. Now we talked about how to use it. You can also get an electric incense warmer that doesn't burn. So if you'd rather not burn incense, maybe you can't do the smoke, maybe where you live doesn't allow smoke. There's a lot of reasons why you might not be able to burn incense where you are, or might not want to. Uh, the electric warmers are awesome because they just heat everything. So the scent is different because things aren't burned. However, the heat just releases the oils, the essence of your blend, and that actually is pretty amazing as well. If you have if you live with animals, they should always be able to get away from it. If you The same goes for essential oils and diffusing essential oils, but if you live with animals, you don't ever burn incense if you have birds, ever. If you have birds, you don't do incense or essential oils, period. But with dogs and cats, you're good as long as You're not using something toxic to cats. Research that if you have cats. But they should just be able to get away from it. So don't like lock them in your bedroom with a stick of incense burning that they can't escape. Remember that their sense of smell is much, much more heightened than yours is. So they should be able to leave, go through the doggy door, or get to a different room at least, and get away from it if they choose to. And they may not. It might not bother them. It depends, right? Maybe they don't like lavender incense either. But you know what I mean. Be careful with that. And of course, always burn incense in a safe place. And that's what I've got. So interesting stuff. I hope I gave you some things to think about with the process of incense. But before we go, I wanted to give you some fun news. Miss Kelly McLean has returned to the lines at One to Listen. So if you want to talk to her, she is over there now. So go hit her up. Her article this week is her goddess astrology for the week. She has a really important interview, she and Lisa, that are doing this week. So next week we'll be able to talk about it and share it, but you're going to want to listen to her podcast. I'm just telling you that. It's so good, the work that she's doing. I love it. But yeah, watch for Kelly. She's back. I'm so excited. My tip of the week, I did put together an additional incense recipe card for you with some other ideas of things you could make. Christy's energy exercise this week is energy breathing. And of course, there's plenty of crime over at True Crime Squad and plenty of meditations over at Planet Meditation. So you can look for those. And hopefully, this edition of Luminous was interesting for you and gave you some ideas. That's my hope. And that's what I've got. So, just a quick reminder that I am a professional psychic advisor over at one2listen.com. You can literally find me there daily, chatting and on the phone lines. If you go over there and I'm not there, just do a callback request or a chat back request. And as soon as I sign back in, the computer will call you and we'll connect. So easy enough. If I'm not there, I'm probably on a podcast. So you can find me one way or another over at One Two Listen, which is number one, number two, listen.com, and look for me, Katie Weaver. And that's what we do. All right, guys. Thank you so much for being here. Thanks for being a part of my process. This has been yet another production of The Katie Weaver Show. Take care.